How far would you go to protect your honor? Would you sacrifice everything to pay back what you owe, even when the world offers you easier, dishonest ways out? This is the story of a man who chose honor over comfort, dignity over survival, and proved that integrity is worth more than life itself.
In a farming village where life revolved around the rhythm of seasons and harvests, there lived a farmer named Mohan. He was 45 years old, with weathered hands that told the story of decades spent working the land. Mohan owned a small plot of 5 acres. Not much, but enough to feed his family if the rains were good and the harvest was plentiful. He lived with his wife, Lakshmi, and their 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Everyone in the village knew Mohan as an honest man. When he borrowed tools, he returned them in better condition than he received them. When he promised to deliver grain, he delivered exactly what he had promised, measured fairly. When someone asked for help, he gave it freely, never expecting anything in return. Mohan is as straight as a bamboo pole, the villagers would say. You could trust him with your life savings, and he'd return every paisa. But honesty doesn't protect you from bad luck. And Mohan's luck had been terrible for 3 consecutive years. The first year, the monsoon failed. The rains came late and lasted only a few weeks. The crops withered in the fields. Mohan's harvest was barely enough to feed his family, with nothing left over to sell. The second year, floods came instead of measured rain. The fields turned into swamps. Disease spread through the crops. Again, the harvest was poor. The third year brought a plague of locusts that destroyed what little had managed to grow. 3 years of failed harvests. 3 years of mounting expenses. 3 years of children needing clothes, food, medicine, and school fees. Mohan had savings, but they were depleted after the first bad year. By the end of the second year, he had nothing left. When the third year's harvest failed, he faced a terrible choice: watch his family starve, or borrow money. Borrowing meant debt, and debt meant dealing with a village moneylender, a man named Sham, who was known for his ruthless business practices. I have no choice, Mohan told his wife one evening, his voice heavy with reluctance. I need to borrow to buy seeds for next season and to feed the family until then. Lakshmi looked worried. Sham charges high interest. Everyone knows this. Once you start borrowing from him, it's hard to get free. I know, Mohan said. But what else can I do? I can't let our children go hungry. And if I don't plant next season, we'll have nothing at all. So Mohan went to Sham and borrowed 10,000 rupees, a modest sum, but enough to buy seeds, pay for basic necessities, and survive until the next harvest. Sham smiled as he handed over the money. Of course, Mohan. Everyone knows you're an honest man. I'm happy to help. The interest is 3% per month, and you can pay it back after next harvest. 3% per month meant 36% annually, a crushing rate. But Mohan had no alternative. He signed the agreement with his thumbprint and took the money. I'll pay you back, Mohan promised. Every rupee with interest. You have my word. I know you will, Sham said, though his smile suggested he knew something Mohan didn't. The fourth year started with hope. Mohan used the borrowed money carefully. He bought good seeds, tended his fields with extra care, and prayed for favorable weather. The rains came on time. The crops grew well. For the first time in 4 years, Mohan dared to feel optimistic. But 3 weeks before harvest, disaster struck again. A sudden hailstorm swept through the region, destroying half of his crops in a single afternoon. Mohan stood in his field the next morning, looking at the flattened plants and battered grain, and felt despair wash over him. The harvest, when it finally came, was barely enough to feed his family for 6 months. There was nothing left over to sell, nothing to repay the loan. When Mohan went to Sham to explain the situation, the moneylender's friendly demeanor changed. I understand you had bad luck, Sham said coldly. But business is business. The loan was due. Now you owe not just the principal, but also 4 months of accumulated interest. That's 11,200 rupees. Mohan felt his stomach drop. But I only borrowed 10,000. Interest compounds, Mohan. You signed the agreement. You can read the terms yourself. Sham pushed the paper across the table. Mohan couldn't read very well, but he could see the numbers had grown. Give me 1 more season, Mohan pleaded. I'll pay you back double if necessary. Just give me time. Sham pretended to consider, then nodded. All right, 1 more season, but the interest continues to accrue. And next time, there will be no extensions. Mohan left feeling trapped. The debt was growing faster than he could possibly earn. But he had no choice except to try again. The 5th year was better. The harvest was good, not great, but decent. Mohan sold everything he could spare. But when he calculated his earnings against the debt, he realized with horror that he barely had enough to pay the interest, let alone the principal. The debt had now grown to 13,000 rupees. How is this possible? Mohan asked Sham. I paid you 4,000 rupees, which covered the interest for the past year, Sham explained smoothly. The principal remains, and it continues to accumulate interest. Mathematics, my friend. You should have learned it in school. Mohan felt the walls closing in. At this rate, he would never escape the debt. It would grow faster than he could possibly pay it. Over the next 2 years, despite working from dawn to dusk, despite good harvests, despite selling everything that wasn't absolutely necessary, Mohan couldn't reduce the principal. The debt had grown to 16,000 rupees. His children were growing, but they wore old, patched clothes because there was no money for new ones. They ate simply because every rupee went toward the debt. His daughter had to drop out of school because they couldn't afford the fees. Lakshmi never complained, but Mohan could see the worry in her eyes, the strain on her face. Maybe we should leave, she suggested one night. Move to another village. Start fresh somewhere else. And abandon the debt? Mohan shook his head firmly. That would be running away. That would be dishonest. I borrowed the money. I will pay it back, no matter how long it takes. But at what cost, Mohan? Our children are suffering. You're working yourself to death. Is honor worth starving for? Yes, Mohan said simply. Because if I lose my honor, I have nothing. A man who doesn't pay his debts is not a man at all. As the years passed and the debt continued to grow, people began offering Mohan advice. A neighbor approached him one day. Mohan, I know a way you could make quick money. There's a contractor who needs workers to transport goods across the border. He pays very well, and he doesn't ask questions about what's in the boxes. Mohan understood immediately. You're talking about smuggling. The neighbor shrugged. I'm talking about feeding your family. Your daughter needs medicine. Your sons need education. Your wife is exhausted from worry. 1 trip, and you could pay off a large chunk of that debt. No, Mohan said firmly. I will not break the law, no matter how desperate I am. Pride is expensive, my friend. So is dishonesty, Mohan replied. Another time, a distant relative suggested, Mohan, why don't you fudge the land records a bit? You could claim you own 7 acres instead of 5. With that extra collateral, you could get a proper bank loan at low interest and pay off Sham. That would be fraud, Mohan said. It's just paperwork. Everyone does it. I don't. Even Sham himself offered a solution. Mohan, you're a fool to struggle like this. I'll tell you what, work for me. Help me with my collections. Visit other borrowers who are late with payments. Encourage them to pay. I'll pay you well, and I'll reduce your debt. Mohan understood what encourage meant. It meant intimidation, threats, perhaps even violence. "I'd rather keep my debt than earn money by hurting others," Mohan said. Sham laughed. "Such noble principles. But principles don't feed children, Mohan. Sooner or later, you'll have to choose your pride or your family." That night, Mohan lay awake, tormented by the question. Was he being selfish? Was his insistence on honesty hurting his family? Would a good father compromise his principles to provide better for his children? He looked at his sleeping wife and children. They were thin. Their clothes were shabby. They deserved better. But if he abandoned his integrity to give them material comfort, what lesson would he teach them? That honor is negotiable? That principles are for sale when the price is right? No. He would find another way. In the 8th year of his debt, Mohan made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He sold his 5 acres of land. The land had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had worked that soil. His father had died on that land. It was Mohan's identity, his livelihood, his connection to his ancestors. But it was also the only asset of real value he possessed. He sold it for a fair price, refusing to accept more than it was worth, even though the buyer was willing to pay extra out of sympathy. With that money, he paid off the entire debt to Sham. "I'm surprised," Sham said when Mohan handed over the final payment. "I thought you'd default eventually, but you actually did it. You paid back every rupee. I told you I would," Mohan said. There was no pride in his voice, only quiet satisfaction of a promise kept. "What will you do now?" Sham asked. "You have no land." "I'll find work," Mohan said simply. And he did. Mohan became a day laborer, working on other people's fields. He who had once been a landowner now worked for daily wages. The work was backbreaking. He had to report each morning to a labor gathering point, where landowners would come to hire workers. Some days he got work. Some days he didn't. The wages were low, barely enough to survive. There was no dignity in the work, no security, no future. Just endless days of hard labor under the hot sun. His sons, now teenagers, were ashamed. "Father, why did you sell the land?" his eldest asked. "We could have managed somehow. Now we have nothing. We have something more important than land," Mohan replied. "We have clean hands and a clear conscience. I owed a debt and I paid it. That land would have been a burden if I kept it while owing money. Now it's gone, but I'm free." "Free?" his son said bitterly. "You're a laborer now. We're poorer than we've ever been. How is that freedom?" Mohan looked at his son steadily. "Would you rather I kept the land by stealing, cheating, or hurting others? Would you be proud of wealth gained dishonestly?" The son didn't answer. "I'd rather be poor with my honor intact than rich with a guilty conscience," Mohan continued. "Someday you'll understand that." But understanding didn't come easily. The family struggled terribly. There were days when they went to bed hungry. There were nights when they had no oil for the lamp. Mohan worked until his hands bled. He took any job offered, carrying heavy loads, digging wells, breaking stones. He never complained. He never stole. He never begged. And slowly, very slowly, through sheer hard work and careful saving, he began to rebuild. 3 years after selling his land, Mohan was still working as a day laborer. But something had changed in the village. People had been watching his journey. They had seen him face crushing debt without compromising his principles. They had seen him sell his ancestral land rather than default on his obligations. They had seen him work harder than anyone else, never complaining, never cutting corners, never asking for charity. And they had been moved by what they saw. A group of village elders approached Mohan one day. "Mohan, we want to offer you an opportunity." The village has some common land that needs to be cultivated. We've decided to lease it to you at a nominal rate. If you can make it productive, you can keep most of the harvest."
Mohan was overwhelmed.
"Why would you do this for me?"
One of the elders, an old man named Vishnu, spoke.
"Because you've taught us something important. In a world where everyone is looking for shortcuts, where people compromise their principles for convenience, you stood firm. You showed us what real integrity looks like. That's worth supporting."
Another elder added.
"Besides, everyone knows that if we entrust this land to you, you'll take care of it better than anyone. Your honesty is your greatest asset."
Mohan accepted the offer with gratitude. He threw himself into the work with renewed energy. He woke before dawn and worked until after dark. He treated the leased land as if it were his own, perhaps better, because he felt such gratitude for the opportunity. His sons, now young men, worked alongside him. They had learned from watching their father's struggles. They had seen that integrity might be costly in the short term, but it builds something more valuable than money: character and reputation. The harvest that year was excellent. Mohan made enough not just to survive, but to save. He paid his rent, fed his family well, and even bought new clothes for everyone. More importantly, his daughter was able to return to school. His sons were learning valuable lessons about hard work and honor. Word of Mohan's success with the leased land spread. His old friend, the man who had bought his 5 acres years ago, came to him with a proposal.
"Mohan, I'm getting old and I can't manage all this land anymore. I want you to buy back your family's 5 acres. I'll sell it to you at the same price I paid, without any interest. You can pay me in installments over 5 years.
Mohan was stunned.
"Why would you do this? You could sell it for much more now."
The man smiled.
"Because I've been holding it for you. I always believed you'd find a way back. A man like you belongs on his own land. Besides, I profited enough from the harvests over these years. I don't need to profit from your misfortune too."
Tears filled Mohan's eyes. This was more than just recovering land. This was the universe acknowledging that his choice to maintain his integrity had been right. He accepted the offer and began working even harder to make the payments. 5 years later, Mohan had fully paid for his land and owned it outright once again. But more than that, he had become something unexpected, a moral authority in the village. Young people would come to him for advice.
"Mohan, uncle, I'm facing financial difficulties. Someone suggested I could solve it by bending some rules. What should I do?"
Mohan would share his story.
"I was in crushing debt for 8 years. People offered me dishonest ways out, and I was tempted. But I chose to keep my integrity, even though it cost me everything temporarily. Today, I have my land back, I have my family's respect, and I can sleep peacefully at night. The shortcuts always cost more in the end."
Other farmers facing debt would seek his counsel.
"How did you do it? How did you survive?" "By never giving up,"
Mohan would say.
"By working harder than anyone else. By refusing to compromise on honesty. By remembering that debt is temporary, but character is permanent."
One day, Sean the moneylender fell ill. He was old now, and no one visited him. He had grown wealthy over the years, but wealth hadn't brought him happiness or companionship. Everyone feared him or resented him. On his deathbed, he sent for Mohan.
"Why did you call me?"
Mohan asked when he arrived. Sean looked at him with regret in his eyes.
"I've been thinking about my life. I have money, but no one respects me. No one will mourn me when I die. You, Mohan, have little money, but everyone respects you. I charged you crushing interest. I hoped you would fail so I could take your land. But you didn't fail. You paid every rupee, even though it cost you everything."
He paused, breathing heavily.
"I want you to know, I respected you for that, even as I tried to trap you.
You are the only person who ever paid me back in full. Everyone else defaulted or cheated or ran away. But you kept your word, even when it destroyed you. I had no choice, Mohan said simply. I gave my word. Sham smiled sadly. That's the difference between us. You thought you had no choice. I thought I had every choice. You chose honor. I chose profit. And in the end, you're the wealthier man. A few days later, Sham died. At his funeral, there were few mourners. But Mohan was there, because he believed in showing respect even to those who had wronged him. After the funeral, people asked Mohan why he had come. Sham made your life miserable for years. Why honor him? Because, Mohan explained, my quarrel was never with Sham the person. It was with debt. He lent me money when I needed it, whatever his motivations. I paid it back. That transaction is complete. Now I can remember him as a human being who died, not as my enemy. This response only increased people's respect for Mohan. Years passed. Mohan grew old, but he remained active and healthy. His sons had become successful farmers in their own right, having learned from their father's example. His daughter had completed her education and become a teacher. One day, a journalist from the city came to the village to write a story about rural life. He heard about Mohan and requested an interview. I've been told you're the most respected man in this village, the journalist said. But from what I can see, you're not the wealthiest. Can you explain this contradiction? Mohan smiled. There's no contradiction. Wealth and respect are different things. I learned that the hard way. Tell me your story, the journalist requested. Mohan shared everything: the failed harvests, the crushing debt, the temptations he had refused, the land he had sold, the years of labor, and finally, the respect and land he had regained. The journalist was moved. So your message is that honesty pays in the end? No, Mohan corrected gently. That's not the lesson. The lesson is that honesty is worth maintaining regardless of whether it pays. I kept my integrity not because I knew it would lead to reward, but because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. But you did get rewarded, the journalist pointed out. You got your land back, you earned respect, your family is doing well. True, Mohan acknowledged. But that wasn't guaranteed. There were years when I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. There were times when my family suffered because of my principles. The point is, I would make the same choices even if I had ended up poor and unknown. Because integrity is its own reward. The peace of mind that comes from knowing you've lived honestly is more valuable than any external success. The journalist published the story, and it spread far beyond the village. Mohan's story touched many people who were facing their own ethical dilemmas. Letters came from people who had read about him. Some thanked him for inspiring them to make honest choices. Others asked for advice about their own debt situations. Mohan responded to all of them with the same message. There is no shortcut to an honest life. It requires work, sacrifice, and sometimes suffering. But it's the only way to live with true dignity. On his 70th birthday, the village organized a celebration in Mohan's honor. People came from neighboring villages to pay their respects. The village head made a speech. Mohan taught us that wealth is not measured in money or land. It's measured in the respect you earn and the example you set. He showed us that a poor man with integrity is richer than a wealthy man without it. Mohan was embarrassed by the attention, but also deeply moved. He stood to address the gathering. I'm no saint, he said. I'm just a farmer who tried to pay his debts. But if my story helps even one person choose honesty over convenience, then my struggles weren't in vain. Remember, honor is not something you inherit. It's something you build every day with every choice you make. Mohan lived to be 85 years old. In his final days, surrounded by his children, grandchildren,
and great-grandchildren, he reflected on his life. "Grandfather," one of his great-grandsons asked, "if you could go back and change anything, what would it be?" Mohan thought for a long moment. "I would pray for better harvests," he said with a smile. "But I wouldn't change my choices. Every hardship taught me something. Every sacrifice made me stronger. Every time I chose honor over ease, I became more myself." His eldest son, now a grandfather himself, asked, "Father, what do you want us to remember most about you?" "Not my struggles," Mohan said. "Remember that honor is never expensive, it's invaluable. Remember that debt, whether financial or moral, must be repaid. And remember that the respect of your community is worth more than any amount of gold." He looked around at all the faces surrounding him, 3 generations that had benefited from the example he had set. "I sold my land once to pay a debt," he said. "But in doing so, I earned something that can never be sold or taken away, the knowledge that I lived with integrity. That's my true inheritance to all of you." Those were among his final words. When he died, the entire village mourned. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people from miles around, people whose lives he had touched, young people he had inspired, families he had advised. The village erected a small memorial stone on his farm with a simple inscription: "Mohan, a farmer who taught us that honor is the only wealth that truly matters." His land was divided among his children, but his real legacy was divided among everyone who had known him. In a world that increasingly valued shortcuts and conveniences, Mohan had shown that the old values, honesty, hard work, keeping your word, were not outdated at all. They were timeless. And perhaps that was the greatest harvest of all, not the crops he grew, but the seeds of integrity he planted in the hearts of everyone who heard his story. Remember, dear viewer, that we all face moments when taking the easy, dishonest path seems tempting, when cutting corners could solve our problems faster, when compromising our principles could give us what we want. In those moments, think of Mohan, a man who had every excuse to compromise, every reason to choose survival over integrity. But he didn't. And while his path was harder, it led somewhere better, to a life of dignity, respect, and peace. Debt is not just financial. Every time we compromise our principles, we go into moral debt. And that debt, unlike money, can never truly be repaid. Honor may be expensive in the short term, but dishonor is far more costly in the long run. The question is not whether you can afford to be honest. The question is whether you can afford not to be. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you to value integrity over convenience, please share it with someone who needs this reminder.